The story of Saint Tarcisius is one of the most moving and inspiring of early Christianity, marked by courage and deep devotion to Jesus in the Eucharist. He lived in the 3rd century in Rome during the period of intense persecution of Christians promoted by the Roman Empire. At that time, being a Christian was risky and often meant facing torture or death. Despite this, Tarcisio, a young man of just 12 years old, dedicated his life to Christ and became an example of faith and love for the Church. His brief existence was sealed with martyrdom, but his legacy resonates to this day. Tarcisio was an acolyte, a young man who served in liturgical celebrations and helped the priests in their tasks. Even at such a young age, he demonstrated spiritual maturity and extraordinary dedication to the mystery of the Eucharist. His devotion was evident to all who knew him. The Christian community in Rome was experiencing days of great distress. Masses were celebrated in secret, usually in the catacombs, to avoid surveillance by the authorities. Many Christians were imprisoned and awaiting trial, and among them there were those who longed to receive Holy Communion. On one of those dark days, the priest responsible for the community needed someone to bring the Eucharist to Christian prisoners. The task was dangerous, as whoever was discovered ran the risk of being executed. It was then that Tarcisio, full of courage, volunteered for the mission. The priest, impressed by the young man's faith, was initially hesitant to accept his offer. However, seeing Tarcisio's firmness and determination, he decided to entrust him with the precious mission. Before leaving, the boy received the blessing and the Eucharist in a small receptacle hidden under his tunic. While walking through the streets of Rome, Tarcisio prayed silently, asking for God's protection to carry out his task. He knew danger was imminent, but his trust in Christ was unshakable. Every step he took was a testimony to his faith. On the way, a group of young pagans noticed that Tarcisio seemed to be holding something close to his chest. Curious and suspicious, they began to question him. They demanded to know what he was carrying, but Tarcisio remained silent, determined not to desecrate the Blessed Sacrament. The young people's insistence soon turned into aggression. Realizing that they couldn't make him talk, they started attacking him. Tarcisio, even in the face of violence, refused to hand over the Eucharist, embracing it with all his strength. As they beat him, the young man's faith became even more evident. He knew he was suffering for Christ, and in his heart he offered his martyrdom as a sacrifice of love. His courage disconcerted the attackers, who did not understand such determination. Amid the confusion, a Christian who was passing by recognized Tarcisio and tried to intervene. The young pagans, frightened by the possibility of being reported, fled, leaving the boy seriously injured. The Christian then approached to help him. Tarcisio, with the little strength he had left, handed the receptacle with the Eucharist to the man, ensuring that it remained intact. Then he closed his eyes and gave his soul to God. His sacrifice had been complete. Tarcisio's body was taken to the Christian community, where everyone mourned his death with great emotion. The courage and purity of their faith were seen as a clear testimony to the power of the Eucharist and the strength of divine grace in a young heart. Soon, the story of Tarcisius began to spread among Christians in Rome and beyond. He was recognized as a martyr of the Eucharist, and his memory became a source of inspiration for all who faced persecution because of their faith. The catacombs, where many Christians sought refuge, became the place where Tarcisius's body was buried. His tomb quickly became a place of pilgrimage, where believers prayed for courage to face trials. Tarcisius's martyrdom highlighted the centrality of the Eucharist in Christian life. For him, the Blessed Sacrament was more valuable than his own life. This truth has been reaffirmed by the Church over the centuries, celebrating his memory with great reverence. The figure of Tarcisio also showed how youth is not an obstacle to holiness. Despite his young age, he deeply understood the mysteries of faith and lived according to the teachings of Christ, without fear. The Church saw Tarcisius as a model for young people, reminding them that they are called to be faithful to Christ in all circumstances. He became the patron saint of altar boys and acolytes, who continue to serve the altar with the same zeal he demonstrated. Over the centuries, devotion to Saint Tarcisius grew in many places. Churches were dedicated to him, and his story was immortalized in paintings, sculptures, and writings that extol his courage and love of the Eucharist. His liturgical feast is celebrated on August 15th, a date on which the faithful remember his example and renew their commitment to faith. On this day, many young people participate in special celebrations, asking for your intercession to be strong in their spiritual journeys. The legacy of Saint Tarcisius transcends the barriers of time and continues to resonate in the heart of the Church. He is a living testimony that love for Christ can overcome any obstacle, even in the most difficult circumstances. Tarcisio's story is told to children as a way to inspire them to live their faith with enthusiasm and courage. She reminds everyone that God calls each person, regardless of age, to a life of holiness and dedication. The depth of Tarcisio's spirituality is a reminder that the mystery of the Eucharist is the center of the Christian life. He understood this with a clarity that touched the hearts of everyone around him, transforming his brief life into an eternal testimony. In a time of disbelief and persecution, the figure of Saint Tarcisius was a shining light of hope. His unwavering faith defied the hostility of the world around him, pointing to a higher reality: God's infinite love. Tarcisio remains an example of fidelity and courage. His story invites us to reflect on how much we are willing to sacrifice for our faith and challenges us to place Christ at the center of our lives, as he did. The death of Saint Tarcisius was a milestone in the history of the first Christians. His martyrdom not only revealed the cruelty of persecution, but also highlighted the transforming power of faith. He became a symbol of total surrender to Christ, inspiring Christians to persevere. Reports of their courage soon spread, reaching far-flung communities facing similar challenges. The narrative of his life was told in secret meetings, strengthening the faithful in the conviction that the Eucharist was truly the body of Christ. The Christian community understood that Tarcisio's sacrifice was not in vain. He showed that faith lived with purity of heart, and total surrender had the power to touch souls and transform hearts, even in the midst of the darkness of persecution. In the years that followed, devotion to the young martyr grew. His relics began to be venerated, and he was portrayed as a boy carrying the Eucharist in the midst of danger. These images became symbols of divine protection and spiritual fervor. As the Church consolidated and Christianity became more accepted, Saint Tarcisius continued to be remembered as an example of indomitable faith. His story was a reminder that, even in moments of peace, fidelity to Christ requires courage and determination. In the following centuries, Tarcisio was exalted in sermons and writings by church fathers, who highlighted his purity of intention and his courage as virtues to be imitated. He was often referred to as Christ's little soldier. The title of Soldier of Christ came to be associated with Tarcisio, not by chance. He did not wield weapons or wear armor, but his unshakable faith was his shield, and his love for the Eucharist was his sword. He fought with the strength of someone who knew he was at the service of an eternal king. The Church recognized Tarcisio as a special intercessor for young people, especially those who served at the altar. He was a model of purity, dedication, and zeal, fundamental virtues for anyone who wanted to get closer to God. During the Middle Ages, when the relics of saints were revered with great fervor, many churches claimed to possess objects associated with Saint Tarcisius. These items were treated with respect and used to strengthen the faith of local communities. In Rome, the catacombs where he was buried became a place of pilgrimage. Many traveled from far and wide to venerate the place where the young martyr lay, feeling inspired by his story and renewing their own faith. Devotion to Saint Tarcisius also reached religious orders, which saw him as an example of obedience and humility. He was often cited as a model for novices who were encouraged to imitate his love of the Eucharist and his readiness to serve. Among the popes, Saint Tarcisius was also remembered with great affection. On several occasions, pontiffs highlighted his example of courage and love for the Blessed Sacrament, using his story to reinforce the importance of Eucharistic devotion. In the 19th century, when Pope Pius IX promoted a renewal of the cult of saints, Saint Tarcisius received special attention. His figure was rescued and presented as a model for Catholic youth in a time of new challenges to the faith. It was during this period that the liturgical feast of Saint Tarcisius gained greater prominence, being included in the official church calendar. Since then, the date has been celebrated with special solemnity, especially among altar boys and acolytes. In many dioceses, Saint Tarcisius's Day has become an opportunity for the spiritual formation of young people. They are reminded that altar service is not just a task, but a vocation to live holiness in everyday life. In the 20th century, devotion to Saint Tarcisius reached new dimensions, especially with the introduction of his story into catechetical programs. His life became part of basic faith teaching for children, highlighting the importance of love for the Eucharist. The figure of Tarcisio came to be seen as a contrast to the materialism and indifference that often mark modern life. He was a reminder that true happiness lies in total surrender to God and in love for the mysteries of faith. In modern times, Saint Tarcisius is especially venerated in communities facing persecution. His story resonates with those who risk their lives to celebrate Mass or protect the Blessed Sacrament in dangerous situations. Many bishops and priests highlight Saint Tarcisius in their homilies as a model of absolute love for the Eucharist. They encourage the faithful to reflect on the centrality of this mystery in Christian life, following the example of the young martyr. Furthermore, his memory is often celebrated in Eucharistic events, such as congresses and processions. He is remembered as the one who gave his life to protect the Church's greatest treasure, the body and blood of Christ. Saint Tarcisius also inspired youth movements in the Church, which seek to promote spirituality among young people. He is seen as a patron of these initiatives, which work to cultivate a love of the Eucharist and service to others. His intercession is often invoked by parents and educators who wish to teach children the importance of faith. They ask that Saint Tarcisius inspire in little ones the same courage and devotion that marked his life. The example of Saint Tarcisius is especially powerful in a world that often disregards Christian values. He shows that even in the midst of hostility, it is possible to remain firm in faith and be a witness to the love of Christ. Tarcisio's story continues to be retold in books, plays, and films. His life is presented in creative ways to reach new audiences, ensuring his memory remains alive across generations. The Church never stopped celebrating Saint Tarcisius as a model of holiness. It is a constant reminder that God calls each person, regardless of age, to fully live their faith and be a witness to his love in the world. As the story of Saint Tarcisius became known in different parts of the world, his figure gained a universal dimension. He came to be seen not only as a martyr of the Eucharist, but as a symbol of Christian courage in the face of adversity. During the 20th century, Saint Tarcisius was especially remembered in times of war. In many countries ravaged by conflict, his story was a reminder that true peace can only be found in Christ, present in the Eucharist. In communities where religious practice is restricted or persecuted, Saint Tarcisius is venerated as the protector of those who take the sacraments in secret. He is a special intercessor for extraordinary ministers of communion and catechists in risk situations. In Brazil, Saint Tarcisio also found a place in the hearts of the faithful. Many Catholic communities celebrate their festival with processions and meetings, reinforcing in young people the importance of living the faith with enthusiasm and determination. His connection with youth is something that transcends cultures and times. Children and teenagers see in Tarcisio an example of how it is possible to be holy even in the simplicity of everyday life, serving God with love and purity of heart. Sacred art played an important role in spreading his memory. Sculptures and paintings of Saint Tarcisius depict his courage in protecting the Eucharist, often surrounded by angels, symbolizing his sacred mission. A famous example is the sculpture of Saint Tarcisius located in Rome, which shows him with a calm and firm expression holding the receptacle containing the Eucharist against his chest. This image conveys the spiritual force that drove him. Nowadays, many parishes and schools adopt Saint Tarcisius as the patron saint of their groups of altar boys. He is presented as a model to be followed, encouraging children to understand the importance of altar service. World Youth Days, promoted by the Catholic Church, often recall the example of Saint Tarcisius. His figure is mentioned as a symbol of total surrender to God's call, even in the face of difficulties. In many dioceses, Saint Tarcisius is honored with competitions and meetings that promote the catechetical formation of young people. They are encouraged to deepen their knowledge of the Eucharist, following in the saint's footsteps. The spirituality of Saint Tarcisius continues to touch the hearts of young people and adults. It is a powerful reminder that faith is not something passive, but an active force that can transform life and the world around us. In the context of the new evangelization, the story of Saint Tarcisius is used to inspire the faithful to proclaim their faith with courage. He is an example that Christian witness, even silent, can have a profound impact. In a world that often disregards sacredness and spiritual values, Saint Tarcisius is a model of resistance. He teaches that fidelity to Christ is a treasure worth any sacrifice, including life itself. Eucharistic devotion, so central to Tarcisio's life, continues to be promoted by the Church as a path to a personal encounter with Christ. His example motivates many to participate in Eucharistic adoration and to renew their reverence for the Blessed Sacrament. Saint Tarcisius is also remembered in moments of crisis within the Church. His life and martyrdom are a call to purity and zeal for faith, values that inspire the faithful to seek spiritual renewal and unity. During the Second Vatican Council, the figure of Saint Tarcisius was mentioned as an example of the importance of lay participation in the life of the Church. He showed that everyone, regardless of age, has an important role in the divine plan. Its influence extends beyond the Catholic Church. Christians of other denominations also see in Saint Tarcisius an example of dedication to the service of God, recognizing the universality of his message of faith and courage. Many writers and theologians throughout history have mentioned Saint Tarcisius in their works, highlighting his devotion as a testimony to the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. He is living proof of the transformative power of this sacrament. In modern times, the figure of Saint Tarcisius is used to encourage respect for the liturgy and Eucharistic worship. It is a reminder that the altar is a sacred place and that the Blessed Sacrament must be treated with the greatest reverence. Its liturgical feast, August 15th, coincides with the solemnity of the Assumption of Our Lady in many regions. This coincidence reinforces the connection between Tarcisio and the Virgin Mary, both examples of total surrender to God's will. Devotion to Saint Tarcisius also manifests itself in special prayers. Many believers ask for your intercession to persevere in the faith and protect Christian values in their families and communities. In communities where young people face great challenges, Saint Tarcisio is a sign of hope. He shows that even in the most difficult circumstances, it is possible to be faithful to Christ and transform the world with the power of love. His story is an invitation to rediscover the value of the Eucharist. Tarcisio knew that by protecting the Blessed Sacrament, he was guarding the Church's greatest treasure. His example calls us to renew our Eucharistic devotion, The faithful who know the story of Saint Tarcisius feel inspired to overcome their own fears and limitations. He is an example that true courage comes from complete trust in God and love for Christ. The testimony of Saint Tarcisius continues to illuminate the path of the Church. He is proof that holiness is possible at any age and circumstance, as long as you live with your heart given to God. The life and martyrdom of Saint Tarcisius echoes deeply in the spirituality of the Church, reminding everyone that faith is a constant call to self-giving. Its story transcends time, uniting the faithful in adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. Many parishes around the world keep Saint Tarcisius's legacy alive, especially in communities where young people actively participate in the liturgy. He is invoked as a guide for those who dedicate themselves to altar service, seeking holiness in their lives. The image of Tarcisio firmly embracing the Eucharist is a powerful representation of the unconditional love that should mark the life of every Christian. He teaches that protecting the faith is a sacred duty, even in the face of threats and sacrifices. In times of secularization, Saint Tarcisius is a model of spiritual resistance. His life challenges us not to give in to the pressures of the world, but to keep Christ as the center of our choices and priorities, witnessing to faith with courage. His memory is a bridge between generations. Parents and grandparents tell their story to their children and grandchildren, planting the seeds of a robust and authentic faith. Thus, Saint Tarcisius continues to be a light that guides hearts towards God. Nowadays, the figure of Saint Tarcisius is used by the Church to promote catechetical teaching about the Eucharist. He is presented as a living example that the sacrament is not just a rite, but a real experience of the presence of Christ. The veneration of Saint Tarcisius also inspires charitable and service initiatives. He reminds us that true adoration of the Eucharist drives us to love and serve others, recognizing the presence of God in each person. Devotion to Saint Tarcisius is not limited to liturgical celebrations. It is experienced in the daily lives of believers who seek to follow his example of courage and zeal, witnessing the presence of Christ in the simplicity and difficulties of life. Tarcisius' martyrdom also highlights the value of religious freedom. His story reminds the faithful to fight to defend the faith, always with a spirit of love and fidelity, without ever giving in to hatred or revenge. In contexts where Christianity still faces persecution, Saint Tarcisius is a powerful intercessor. He encourages the faithful to persevere, trusting that God's love always triumphs over darkness. The example of Saint Tarcisius finds a special echo among young people, who often face challenges to their faith in a world marked by relativism and religious indifference. He shows that it is possible to live the truth with joy and integrity. Many dioceses organize special events on Saint Tarcisius Day, promoting activities that help young people reflect on the importance of the Eucharist in their lives. He is seen as a friend and protector of Christian youth. The Eucharistic spirituality of Saint Tarcisius is a constant invitation to worship. He reminds us that the Blessed Sacrament is an inexhaustible source of grace, and that being before the Eucharistic Christ transforms our lives. In many regions, Saint Tarcisio is celebrated as the patron saint of movements that promote peace. His surrender to faith is a symbol that the true peacemaker is the one who lives the truth of Christ, even in the midst of chaos. For centuries, Saint Tarcisius has inspired artists to express his story in masterpieces that exalt his holiness. Paintings, sculptures, and stained glass tell his story, allowing future generations to contemplate his devotion. In the Vatican, the memory of Saint Tarcisius is preserved as an example of Christian heroism. Its story is told to pilgrims from all over the world who visit Rome to learn about the roots of the Christian faith. In the digital age, Saint Tarcisio finds space on social networks and online platforms. Her story is shared as a testimony of how faith can overcome barriers and inspire hearts, even in modern times. The story of Saint Tarcisius challenges us to reflect on the value we give to the Eucharist. He showed that the sacrament is not just a ritual, but Christ himself who gives himself for us, worthy of all love and reverence. Your fidelity to the Blessed Sacrament is an invitation to renew our commitment to faith. Saint Tarcisius teaches us that love for God must be expressed in every action, even the simplest, as this is how holiness manifests itself. The Church celebrates Saint Tarcisius not only as a martyr, but as an example that everyone, especially young people, can respond to the call to holiness. His life demonstrates that God acts powerfully in pure and willing hearts. The story of Saint Tarcisius continues to live, echoing in hearts that seek courage to follow Christ. He is a testimony that true love for God transforms the world, starting with those who give themselves without reservation. His example is a reminder that every Christian, like him, is called to be a bearer of Christ in the world. Just as Tarcisio carried the Eucharist, we are called to take God's love to the places where he is most needed. The life of Saint Tarcisius inspires us to be faithful, even in adverse situations. It is a sign that divine grace is sufficient to sustain us, even in the face of the greatest challenges. Today, Saint Tarcisius remains one of the greatest examples of faith, courage, and love for the Eucharist. Its story transcends centuries and cultures, uniting Christians in the certainty that sacrifice for Christ is never in vain. When we remember Saint Tarcisius, we are invited to renew our faith and our love for the Blessed Sacrament. He is a living witness that true happiness lies in surrendering to God, trusting that in his presence we find full life.